Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us, a truly international audience this afternoon, as it is where I find myself in Jersey. Masterpiece offers limitless opportunities for visitors to look and learn about works of art, both by engaging with our passionate and knowledgeable exhibitors and by looking at works of art in a relaxed but stimulating way, something we have been all very much missing, but now at last, with limited opening up of museums and galleries, are able to do. Our talks and education program plays a key role at Masterpiece, and our programming will continue throughout the coming year to engage both our established and encouraging a new audience, eager to learn and discover new and stimulating ways of looking at works of art. Encountering beauty through the material world has each month focused our eyes and minds on a different material. February was devoted to marble, followed by wood and pigment, and today, of course, to metals, to be followed by ceramic and precious stones. This exploration spans cultures and time through a series of thoughtful and engaging podcasts, videos, and panel discussions. And please do visit our website, masterpiecefair.com, to see the full extent of the programs devoted to materials, all of which are recorded, and to catch up on anything you may have missed. I very much hope also that you will join us again on Saturday, June the 26th at 5 p.m. for Earth and Alchemy, the narrative of ceramics. And please note the adjusted day, as this talk will form part of our panel discussions during the week of Masterpiece Online, which itself goes live on June the 23rd. Today, we are focusing on metals inspired by nature, and I would like to extend my very deep thanks to our distinguished panel of speakers and to Timothy Schroeder, who will moderate the conversation. Tim is, as you are all very well aware, an outstanding scholar, and for those who have not yet read it, I would highly recommend his revelatory new book, A Marvel to Behold, Gold and Silver at the Court of Henry VIII. I will now hand over to Tim, who will introduce our speakers for what I know is going to be a truly vibrant and exciting discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Philip, and thank you also for the unexpected puff. A very warm welcome to everybody from me. This has been a tremendous series so far, the perfect anecdote to lockdown, even though perhaps the less than perfect anecdote to being able to attend Masterpiece Fair in person. But I'm delighted that we've found a slot in this series for metalwork. For those of you who haven't seen any of the previous panel discussions, the event will last an hour. It will start with 3 brief presentations by our panelists, after which we'll have a group discussion to explore some of the ideas that have come up. Then we'll round off with some questions from you. So please feel free to enter those at any stage in the chat box. We've got a terrific panel of speakers this evening, and they all work with metals in very different ways. But what's going to bring the discussion together is that we're going to focus on metal through the lens of nature. Junko Mori is an amazingly creative artist whose works draw on nature in startlingly original ways. Tobias Capwell is a curator and user of arms and armor. And Rungwei Kingdon is a bronze founder who is constantly testing the limits of possibility. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. And I've been told to keep this very brief because you'll find all the nitty-gritty on the website. Junko Mori is Japanese, but she's lived and worked here in the UK for many years and is now based in North Wales, a far cry from her native Japan. She trained as a blacksmith, but soon turned to making fascinating sculptures in steel and silver, and more recently in bronze as well. In the last few years, she's mastered an intricate casting technique too, with extraordinary results. Rungwei Kingdon was brought up in Uganda. After moving to England, he and his wife, Claude Koenig, set up the Pangolin Editions Foundry. But what started as a tiny operation in their garden shed and grew and now employs 150 people. Rungwei is perhaps not a household name, but you will have seen many of his works without knowing it. He is the éminence grise of the sculpture world and has worked with many of the artists whose works we all know very well. And finally, we come to Tobias Capwell, who is curator of arms and armor at the Wallace Collection and an incredibly productive author. He has 2 books coming out this very year, and in 2012, his Masterpieces of European Arms and Armor at the Wallace Collection won the prestigious Apollo Magazine Book of the Year. But his knowledge isn't limited to working with long retired historic material. He's also a jouster with his own horse and his own armor. And you can imagine how enriching that must be for understanding what armor is really all about. So that's quite enough from me at this stage. Let's move straight on now to our first presentation, which is from Junko Mori.
Hello, thank you, Tim, and for the instruction. So I got just only 5 minutes. I have to crack on. Right, so 5 minutes. Here we go. I got timer. Okay, so on the image on the left, it's my doodle drawing. It's actually, I did it this January, but I started these drawing, so the pattern drawing since when I was a child, about 10. I used to obsess with microscope, and biology teacher introduced me this gadget, and I used to collect green goopy, green dirtiest water is better because you find so many amazing creatures in a tiny drop of water. And then I just saw this amazing moment of egg. It's all like cell division. I have no clue, something just moving around and propagating. So since I struck by this tiny sort of units growing infinitely, so that's kind of still the core of my aesthetic concept. Then I kind of moved on to university. I always wanted to go to art college, and then I enrolled in 3D design in Musashi Art University in Tokyo. I came across blacksmithing there, and then I done different material, but metal was the hardest material for me to manipulate. So it's a bit like I always loved the challenge. Like easy to get is not interested me, so I kind of tackle this hard material. And then just my love to steel is mainly that immediate response when it's red hot color. If you apply right pressure, like damage in a way with hammer, you get some amazing result. And that was the beginning of my metalworking career. And next slide, please. Then I moved on to Liverpool, and I met amazing silversmith Chris Knight, recommended me to apply for sponsorship. Basically, that was his idea in a way, like Junko, how about doing something in silver? And then I thought, yeah, why not? And because I was working in a publication company in Tokyo for a year, so welding in different material wasn't that difficult for me. So I got this sponsorship, and then this is a silver, the largest in volume, also the heaviest, whopping 12 kilograms silver in one piece. It's a 0.5 meter diameter, quite big. So that was 2018 I made. And next slide, please. And this is a commissioned by Silver Trust for the house 10 Downing Street. And then that year was the 25th anniversary or 30th, sorry, I'm not sure. Anyway, sorry. And then I've been asked to make table centerpiece. And so it's very open brief. So the first time kind of really sculpture piece, I got really wanted to do some sort of a botanical drawing. I was researching that time, and then inspired by this aesthetic of that house itself, because the house is black, if you visited before or not, and the door is black and a white and a black checkered, foyer floor. So that's inspired me to combine my silver and steel separated practice into one piece. And then also I introduced the bronze casting, hand-built wax modeling. So if you look closely, there's a lots of different parts being made in a different technique: cast silver, cast bronze, patinated, and forged, welded, all sorts. So next slide, please. So this is the latest piece. 2 years ago, I decided to buy gold for some reason, and then I welded on the tip of rods and then forged afterward. So each petal have very unique pattern emerge when I flattening it. So some of them like a stretched like a wrappered, like a dotty, and some had a very strange created like a 18 colored gold almost, so like a green yellow color. So that was a very unique very much first piece I never ever done, using gold. But I'm gone 5 minutes. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Junko. I was having a little technical difficulty then. It said it couldn't start the video, but I think it has started the video. So thank you, Junko. That was great. And I must say, I love your use of the term doodle for that absolutely wonderfully finished drawing. It does suggest to me that it's your modesty that stand behind that. It was wonderful to see the Downing Street Commission as well. So, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that later on. So let's now move on. Thank you for that, Junko, and we'll move on to Rungwei, who's next up.
I think
we don't have you on camera as yet.
No, I don't think you.
There we are.
I think, am I there? Okay.
Got you, thank you.
Very good. So, as you can see from the slide, I am a metal caster, primarily in bronze, but many other metals as well. And I think casting is almost part of human nature. It's a technique that we developed 6,000 years ago and is our third great technology after stone flints and pottery. So it's a sort of universal influence on humanity, I feel, and not always in the way that you might expect. I think a lot of people thinking of inspired by nature will get an image of a fluffy kitten or a pretty bird, but actually metal itself can be the inspiration. It is also part of nature, as are we. And the sort of crystal formations and organic shapes that metals and ores are found in are as much an influence as the incredible life of plants, insects, birds, mammals, forests, air, water. The casting process itself mimics nature. It's very much akin to the natural processes of fossilization that nature has done for many millennia, many millions of years before we even came into existence. But growth, change, evolution have all influenced our sense of design and the nature of the art that we make. The growth of seashells or antelope horns, just to name a couple of examples, are almost exactly the same process as 3D printing, which is increasingly becoming an area that sculptors are using for making work, and again, mimic nature to an extraordinary degree. Something that I think we'll be seeing a lot more of in the future. Metal casting was first done 6,000 years ago, as I said, but it wasn't bronze. It was arsenical, antimony, copper. And that has one great advantage, that it melts at the low temperature of 650 degrees. You can even melt it in an open fire. And that's its advantage. It had a couple of disadvantages. The first is that it's poisonous, so a lot of people died making it. But the other one is that it's very brittle as a cold metal, and therefore was completely useless as tools or as weapons. So for 500 years, all casting was really for cultural artifacts, things like crowns and scepters and sculpture, of course. But after a 500-year-long apprenticeship, humans had mastered controlling temperatures right up to the 1,000-degree mark, which you need to melt bronze. And that enabled the increased versatility of bronze as a metal to come into action. And that's when we start seeing bronze weapons and bronze tools being made, something that we've continued to do ever since, obviously, alongside making art with the processes. Contemporary art, which is what I'm concerned with helping today's sculptors create, frequently uses nature in all its aspects as inspiration. And we've had the extraordinary privilege of helping artists across the globe make some extraordinary works of art. I'm going to call for my next slide now, just to talk about a few other examples. So this is a cast of an extinct tortoise, which was part of a project we did to recreate several extinct animals, in the hope that by giving actual scientific volumetric face to these extinct animals, maybe we could give the abstract notion of extinction a face and make it more pertinent to us, something that we're very much involved with in other forms. So this is how we started. We cast the actual skull of the extinct tortoise. That was one of the animals. The next slide shows a finished example. So for the dodo, which became extinct in about 1660 on the island of Mauritius, we actually cast its skeleton. There are a few skeletons that remain, and we cast the whole skeleton. And then working with the sculptor Nick Bibby, who painstakingly built up an anatomically accurate bird on top of its bones. So again, the influences from nature can come from their remains as much as from photography. The next slide gives a much freer interpretation of nature. You can see that it's vaguely based on a form like an ammonite or a pill woodlouse or something. This is by Steve Dilworth, and the very central egg contains the mummified remains of a hooded crow, which has been encased in a sarcophagus and then welded into the enclosed metal. This is actually using two different metals fused together. Was an enormous challenge to make, but again, shows a very different influence from nature. If we go to the next slide, nature is often an incredibly powerful symbolic thing. We've already seen the dodo. The dodo was the first time man realized he could make something become extinct, and therefore it has become a symbol of extinction. At the moment, pangolins, which is our namesake animal, are in a great deal of trouble. They're hugely exploited. And so we wanted to make an image of what an extraordinary, beautiful, unique product of millions of years of evolution a pangolin is. The next slide shows that even not just the modeling of the animal, but the metalworking and the casting of it is all done by hand. And if we can have the next slide, please. This shows you that bronze casting is a collaborative activity. We don't do it on our own. Unlike Junko, who is a solo artist, we need a huge team of dedicated, skillful people to make things. So I think scale is always impressive in nature as in art. This is a life-size elephant. It weighed 5 tons in bronze. And this is the team that made it. And I think it's a bit like having an enormous orchestra. You can make beautiful music as a solo performer, but there's something spine tingling about a full orchestra in full flow. And I would like to feel that a large team of very skillful artisans can produce a similar effect for sculptors. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rungwe. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think unless one is a professional archaeologist, it possibly would have come as quite a surprise to think of casting as being such a very, very ancient technology. So that was fascinating. Goodness me, what a staggering range of projects you become involved with. And I was particularly moved in a way by your last 2 images, by the powerful image of the pangolin, and we are all aware of its awful trouble at the moment. And your last image just well, it speaks entirely for itself. It makes your elephant look like a project like building of Concorde or whatever, which in some ways it probably is. The final presentation now is from Tobias. Toby, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. We'll just wait for the slides. There they are. Excellent. Yes. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Toby Capwell. I'm curator of Arms and Armor at the Wallace Collection in London, which I'm happy to say is opening again to the public finally on 3rd of June. We're in the process of busily getting everything ready. When you explore a collection of arms and armor like the one at the Wallace, nature is never really far from your mind. You can't actually talk about this material without reference to the natural world. The development of weapons and armor is ultimately about physical augmentation. It's about humans altering and enhancing their natural anatomical capabilities. And that's really, in a way, a natural process. I think arms and armor is nature. Next slide, please. Historically, we've augmented ourselves in many different ways. We imitate nature by building artificial exoskeletons since we are not born with them. We have no claws, so we make them out of bronze, iron, and steel. We also commandeer the natural abilities of other creatures, foremost the horse. The next slide, please. Ultimately, this is about power or empowerment, the power to become something more than what you are, something more than human. I experienced this in a transformative way when I was 5 years old. In 1977, my grandmother took me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, home of one of the world's greatest collections of arms and armor. And in that gorgeous day-lit gallery, on the left here is what I saw, an image of power and splendor that profoundly affected me. I freely admit that I wanted to be a knight long before I wanted to be a curator in a museum. And on the right, nearly 40 years later, this is me in a tournament in Germany in 2012. And perhaps you can see a certain resemblance. Next slide, please. My subject is inherently practical, physical, and I've always felt that the physical practice of the historical martial arts is a natural part of what I do. As a practitioner, I feel the changes this equipment makes to my body. I experience personally this process of artificial evolution. Next slide, please. I've also witnessed the power that it has on other people. In 2015, I served as one of the 2 armored horsemen accompanying the recently discovered remains of King Richard III to their final resting place in Leicester Cathedral. Some might assume that the image of a mounted knight is archaic and irrelevant, except that it isn't. Many onlookers in Leicester spontaneously burst into tears when they saw us. Something about it resonated, perhaps on an instinctual level. Next slide, please. In some deep place, humans know they are physically weak and vulnerable. They know there are beings who are stronger and more powerful than they are. And for centuries, armor as a sculptural art form has engaged with these feelings, exploring ideas of the human body, nakedness and vulnerability, while also attempting to create an artificial invulnerability. Achilles didn't need armor, but ordinary mortals do. Next slide, please. Beyond the practical, enhanced physical attributes that armor and weapons confer upon their users, an admiration for the power of nature was historically expressed through decoration and ornament too. On the famous Franco-Flemish lion armor made in the 1540s, the king of beasts is invoked in a wonderfully flamboyant way through embossed and chased decoration. Next slide. Less directly, but no less effectively, flora as well as fauna play a fundamental role in the function of arms and armor as expressive works of art. Images of flowers and vegetation are a common way in which the beauty of the natural world was used to impart a sense of grace, sensitivity, and elegance to objects which might otherwise seem cold and mechanical. And of course, the natural properties of minerals are essential too. Foremost, the eternal, incorruptible qualities of gold. Next slide, please. This is one for Junko. But even more modest armors can have a quite ornate appearance involving imagery drawn from nature. German black and white armors, for example, tend to be quite inexpensive and roughly made, and yet there's a wonderful contrast between the blackened steel ground and the embossed and polished foliage, which creates a very strong visual effect. Final slide, please. Even something as simple as an oil-painted surface applied to armor of very low quality has the power to summon very ancient feelings of passionate admiration and abject terror, the duality of the human relationship with the natural world. Thank you.
Right. Well, Toby, thank you very, very much for that. That was a tremendous tour d'horizon in 5 minutes flat. And if I can just repay or pass on Philip's puff about my book at the beginning of this session, I would just like to make a puff for you, Toby, and the extraordinary collection that you look after. And for those of you listening who don't know the Wallace collection, Arms and Armor collection, it is really one of the very greatest in the world. And I urge you on the 6th of June or whenever it is that the collection opens its door to hire yourselves there and go and have a good look. Now, are the others going to come on screen? I hope so. Now there's Toby and Rungwei and Junko. Good. Well, look, thank you all very, very much for your fascinating and very, very different presentations. And I think what we draw from it in the first instance is an impression of the extraordinary range of materials and of processes that are involved and covered by this simple term metalwork. But I just like to look a little bit more closely at this idea of what we mean by being inspired by nature, because I mean, we've seen obviously that nature inspires the forms of some of the works we've been talking about, but I wonder whether it has other senses than that. And Rungwei, I wonder if I could possibly start you on that one.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think you know, we are a part of nature, and we play a role within it. These days, an incredibly powerful and poignant role that we must take very seriously. As a matter of fact, we've been working very hard to make sure that our processes are as carbon lean as is possible to make them. But I think that's a current part of being a part of nature, as much as it is in the processes we use. I mean, I was very struck looking at Toby's slides of the way that the articulations in the armor are very influenced by the articulations of crustaceans, so that there's a sort of property of articulation mechanics, if you like, that we have appropriated directly from nature. And I think, you know, a great deal of more contemporary art is actually inspired not so much by images of the major mammals or wildlife as processes of nature, as elements like the wind and the sun and you know, more tectonic forces. And I think they're proving just as inspiring as anything else in the natural world.
That's very interesting. Junko, when we spoke the other day, I was very struck by the way that you said that you were very conscious that not only are you creating forms that are inspired by nature, but that the material you're working with is nature. And I wonder if you'd like to expand on that a little bit.
Yes, so like a lot of people think metal is hard and legit, and then like a artist inspired by nature is like a more making flower, which I do actually, but like a obvious visual in sort of aesthetic reason. It's not really I'm actually coming from. I came from, it's more to do with the how things grow, the impact of the natural, like almost like a Buddhist way of thinking. It's like almost reincarnating, circulating. Like a metal is amazing material. Like for example, it melts and it makes shape and it melts back, and it's almost like a circulating itself. And then I always get inspired through tangible practice. For example, like a prime example is I trained as a blacksmith, so it's hot forging, and then when I start doing the silver, it's cold forging. So it's you anneal and soften, and then when you're forging, it's cold. And then but the softness is actually when you hot forging steel is much like a butter after you cold forging silver. So it's lots of it's kind of, as a practitioner, it's always find the discovery of a almost kind of opposite to like a human instincts. Like if more you touch material, you discover much deeper meaning or material property than you initially thought. Like a gold, how they behave when it's melt tip of silver. It was absolutely fascinating. It's like almost they kind of got magnetic, like a whoop together.
Yes,
it's kind of attract each other. So it's only way to understand why metal is a very much part of nature is just touching it and doing it. It's incredible to see that differences of different metals.
Toby, Rungwei started his talk by saying that nature isn't all about cuddly bunnies. When I see Arms and Armor, of course, I'm reminded of nature being read in tooth and claw. I mean, Arms and Armor shows, of course, an aggressive side of nature, and I wonder how you think that squares with the beauty of these objects themselves.
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim, and it's something that cuts right to the heart of my subject and how we deal with it in museums. and it tells us something too about how the modern mind works. I'm always struck by how, in thinking about Arms and Armor, visitors, people I talk to about this subject, they often want it to be one thing. They want armor to be about violence. They want it to be about bloodshed, or they want it to be about art and sculpture and beauty. And the thing about reality is it doesn't fall into boxes, and it's, you know, many things all at once. The Middle Ages or the Renaissance was a time that was extraordinarily beautiful and stupefyingly awful,
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
And the world still is like that. It's just, you know, it's a matter of extremes. And armor is like that too. It is not all of it, but a lot of it is about violence, violence inherent in the society, and it's violence used to enforce a particular political and cultural order. But at the same time, it's beautiful. Something can be beautiful and awful at the same time. And we can
The mushroom
appreciate,
cloud, for example.
we can, yeah. I mean, Henry Moore did a sculpture and, you know, inspired by mushroom clouds, and
Yeah.
as if other artists. But these dualities are, you know, mutually enriching as well. You know, beauty and awfulness exist side by side, and violence and art exist side by side. We weren't just painting during the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a fantastically violent period, and certainly in European history.
Yes.
We stay mindful of these things, and we try and balance, and we try not to get too depressed about it.
Let's move on, because I'm very interested in the notion. Well, again, another of Rungwei's slides gave a minor hint in it. It's the notion of collaboration. I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about that, because I think, Junko, you work primarily as a sole practitioner in a sense, but Rungwei, you say in one of your one of the things I've seen online, you say we're not artists, we're founders, and I think I'd like to ask you, is it quite as simple as that, or is there, you're not just following the instructions that you receive on the back of an envelope from the artist? There's a creative discussion there, I suppose, isn't there?
There is a creative discussion, of course there is. Any social activity needs communication. But I would probably define it that an artist is someone who has a personal language, and they use that language in whichever media they choose to work in. I don't really have a language. I've got skills, I've got craft skills, and I am far better putting those to use, helping other people who maybe don't have quite the same range of skills to create works that are actually in another person's language. And I think artisans have always done that for artists. And as I mentioned probably while talking to my last slide, I think music is quite a good analogy, in that a musician, a composer has the music in his or her head, but none of us can hear it unless there are these craftsmen who play the music to a very high degree of craftsmanship. You know, I think it was Walter Gropius who said an artist is an exalted craftsman. You know, there is a sort of a sliding scale probably.
Yes.
But I definitely see myself as a craftsman and not an artist, and that is primarily to do with language and having a language.
Yes.
Or in my case, not having it.
Now, I haven't seen in the flesh the elephant that you showed in the last slide, but I do know another elephant that you have made very well, and that is the one you made for Selim Zilka, and the artist then was David Lomax, I believe. And I know that Salim is watching now from
Oh, is he?
California.
Hello, Salim.
But a few yards away from the elephant. And I wonder if you could just describe how that particular project went in terms of you feeling that you were fulfilling David Lomax's intentions. I mean, color is an important thing, for example, isn't it?
Colour is part of it, but I think the thing that he was most concerned about is that the enlargement that we made for him would be an accurate enlargement of the forms and surfaces that he made. So what we did is we did it all the old-fashioned way, you know, the Renaissance way, using grids and squaring it up and pointers. And then we had David Lomax working with us for a couple of months to make sure that all the wrinkles were in exactly the right place. Yeah, it was the very first life-size elephant we made, the one for Salim, and the one you saw has been our fifth so far.
Goodness me,
yes.
quite a herd. Toby, you are, of course, a curator, but curators collaborate too. And I wonder if you could say something about the importance of collaboration in your field of work.
Yes, especially in when you're working with arms and armor. You know, you're dealing, it's an art form, but it's also technology. It's also craftsmanship. It's also art. And I can't afford to just look at things in museum cases. I have to talk to modern craftsmen working metal who can tell me more about how these things were made. I need to talk to archaeometallurgists who look at metal under the microscope and can tell from the crystalline structure of the metal what's been done to it and what metal is a greater quality and better heat treated than some other metal. And I need to talk to, you know, modern riding masters about, you know, the potential capabilities of horses and how much weight can they carry for how long. And it forces you to work in a very interdisciplinary way.
Yeah.
And that's really, that's embodied by the fact that armor is technology for fighting at the same time as it's an expressive art form. The armorer is an engineer at the same time as sometimes he's an artist.
Junko, do you feel collaboration will become part of your work pattern as you're constantly exploring new avenues and new possibilities? And will collaboration, do you think, come to play a part in that? Or does it already in a way that I don't possibly know?
Yeah, so yeah, I nearly said something where you said, Rundgren said, I'm sold artist, but I never thought that way because I got 2 more people as well. I've got 4 people, forging people, like a multi-discipline person, silver person and stuff like that. And also I got fabricator to support certain mold. And so, and also collaboration is a really interesting word because metalworking, especially any crafts actually, you know, if you, as a practitioner, I'm standing on huge sort of history, human history of practitioner, other past practitioner. They discover so many things, layer of, you know, curiosity, experiment, and then so I didn't invent TIG welder, for example. Someone did it.
Yeah,
then
okay,
I'm using that knowledge. So I'm standing on huge knowledge, in a way, collaboration with history, really. Craft is all about collaboration, I believe.
Yes.
It's not just tangible things, but as a knowledge.
Well, thank you for that. Now, I'm conscious that time is moving on. We want to open up in a moment to questions from the audience, but I'd just like to touch on one thing. And Toby, I think I'm going to direct this you first of all. This a slightly controversial question, you might say. It's the anti-museum question. It's the thing about museums is that everything has an unwritten sign saying "Noli me tangere," and yet it seems to me from what you have been saying that actually touching, handling is completely crucial to your understanding of objects. And do you feel there's a certain sort of stress in that dichotomy?
Yeah, it's a very difficult problem, especially when you're dealing with arms and armor. A beautiful Renaissance armor is not a painting. It was not designed to simply be regarded on a wall. It's meant to be used. It's not meant to be seen in a glass box. It's meant to be seen outside in the sunlight. You know, you realize very quickly that a museum, certainly for arms and armor, is an totally decontextualized environment. It couldn't be further from the living environment of these things. So how do you work within a museum space to give your visitors a tiny sense of the real living environment? It's basically impossible. But what I try to do is find ways of just stimulating the imagination. Just prick the imagination and let your visitors go on their own journey. But you know, you can't really understand armor unless you see it moving. You can't really understand armor until you've been inside it.
Yes.
I've spent a lot of my life inside armor, so I then try however I can to give people a sense of what that's like in my work. But it's not easy. We live in a very different world.
Junko, your
Can I say
works,
something?
yes,
Oh,
I was
sorry.
just
Yeah.
going to say deflect that to you and say that your works in some ways don't help to be touched because of the sensitive materials they're made of that react to oils in the skin and so forth.
Yeah, but I make my really fast, very much fast piece was this very spiky black steel sculpture. And then when I was standing Chelsea Crafts Fair year 2000, and then lots of people came like straight away touching it and ow!
Oh.
And then everyone thought that was rubber or something like that. And then it looks soft. And so, but like as Tobias said, I studied lots about arms and armor when I was a student. I even made a chainmail and from copper. I never thought arms and armor are pure violent representation of that. I found it's totally opposite. It's a protection. Because of the fear from the violence, human have to adapt to protect the body. And then I fascinated it. And then I had a skeletal model, usually medical student has. And then I always interested how, you know, animal casting like a big elephant is the same. You have to understand how under the skin, what is in it. And then that's like arm is so deep. It's arms and armor is, as Tobias said, really perfectly. So I really hate these biases. People think what, you know, created, oh, spiky objects, you like really, yeah, I got a few invitations. Do you want to join this S&M things? And I was like, oh my God, I'm not interested in that
quite
at
enough
all.
of that. This is a family show.
Yeah, sorry.
Now, I think at this stage I'm going to turn to Craig. Craig, are you listening? And you're going to open up to the floor, as it were.
Thanks, Tim. A question for Junko. Does the structure of nature inspire or influence or even teach you how to construct your pieces?
So, sorry, structure of nature.
So does the structure of nature inspire or influence or even teach you how to construct your pieces?
Oh, totally, utterly. Everything is all about that structure, like a physical structure, also like how nature coexists. For example, it's always my theme, and how they try to diversely sort of exist each other. And then that's why I kind of sort of use almost orchestra of different technique to apply into one piece. And then so I learn a lot from the casting, that certain shape is much easier to create, and then forging is easier to create another piece, and then so that's actually almost nature structure itself. Like, for example, evolution is always happening. Nature is to adapting the how to survive, for example. So it's me as an artist practitioner, it's the same thing, like how I adapt the technique to what I wanted to create. So it's almost same as our natural structure. Is it answer to that question?
Sounds a good answer to me.
Thanks, Junko. A question for Tobias. There's an assumption that armor was hand-shaped and cast for nobles on their bodies, but was armor then, how was it made for the troops? And did it fit? And was it any sort of hindrance to them going to war by that fitting?
Okay, there's a lot in there actually, but I mean, yes, I mean, essentially the fit aspect of this, armor is a metal clothing. And just like clothes, the expensive ones are custom made, bespoke tailoring, but most of us wear off the peg clothes. And armor is much the same. In the 15th and 16th centuries, there was a huge industry in mass-produced armor, and comparatively few people had custom-made things. Armorers were craftsmen who really had an extraordinary knowledge of the human anatomy and the basics of human bodies. And they were very, very good at making things that would work for most people. It might not work as well as something that's made, custom fitted to your body specifically, but it will work well enough. It will work well enough to make it worth wearing. And although as far as the encumbrance goes, armor is usually not as heavy as everyone thinks, but it's still, an average weight of armor for war is 25 kilos, something like that. So there is a level of encumbrance, but the incredible benefits you gain by training to put up with that encumbrance are very extraordinary. It's the difference between life and death. So for hundreds of years, this is what people did. They had good reasons for wearing it. There's a later tradition from the 17th century onwards. I blame Cervantes for creating this idea of the image of an armored man as a satirical idea, as a way of talking about a group of people who can't change with the times, are irrelevant and obsolete, and can't see the world how it really is. That's the later culture of satirizing and ridiculing the idea of armor. But I guarantee you, for hundreds of years, people had very good reason for wearing it.
Thanks, Tony.
Great.
A question for Rongwe. You mentioned 3D printing in your introduction. How have the advances in digital technology evolved the casting techniques at the foundry?
Well, a lot is the answer. We are able to work with artists all over the world digitally. They can send us files and we can print their work out in a way that before would have taken containers and shipping. So it's actually becoming much more prevalent for us to work digitally. But we seldom work entirely digitally. We work digitally for up to a certain stage, and then there's always an interaction with the hand-built and with the age-old processes. So it's really quite wonderful to use 3D printing and virtual reality at the same time as using a 6,000-year-old process. And there's something very beautiful in that marriage of a current technology with a very ancient one.
Great, thank you. I think we might have time for just one more question, and this is to both Junko and Rongwe. If you could perhaps talk about the transformation from the drawing, the design, to the final object, as you cannot sort of fully predict or anticipate the final look of that metal introduces, particularly when you're casting it. So there's an element of surprise at the end.
Sorry, Andrew. On my case is my drawing is a completely, like I always call it like jogging before full marathon. So I visually practice how things grow, but I never look at this drawing to finalize the idea. So I never weld anything with preconceived design in my head. So it's it's just grow design and without design. So I don't have that from the beginning at all. Sorry.
That's you as an artist. I have to be able to give the artist what he wants, but that's not to say that there isn't always an element of surprise. No two castings come out exactly the same. Very small differences in humidity, in levels of moisture to dry material. Don't forget, we're using lots of materials in order to get to a bronze. You know, we're using wax and rubber and plaster and all sorts of other things. So yeah, it's there's always an element of surprise, and sometimes that's joyous. You have a wonderful accident, and other times you have the opposite and you start again.
Great, thank you.
Craig, I think that's probably all we've got time for, isn't it?
Yes, thank you, Tim.
But goodness me, how quickly an hour goes. And I'd just like to thank you all very, very much, Junko Mori, Rungwe Kingdon, and Toby Capwell, for your fascinating, fascinating insights. I would love to have taken these discussions further. Indeed, there were some more topics I was hoping we would have time to address, but sadly we didn't. But it's been great anyway. Thank you very much indeed. And goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.